Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be tackling Asian Paint's Q2FY25 financials. And let me tell you, these had some surprises, even for a seasoned paint watcher like myself. We've got the standalone and consolidated results here, plus the press release, all hot off the presses from November 9th.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating case study.
Mm.
Asian Paints is the undisputed king in the Indian paint market. But even kings face challenges sometimes. And by the end of this deep dive, you'll understand not just the numbers themselves, but also what they signal for both the company and the industry as a whole.
Okay, so first glance at the numbers. I gotta admit, I raised an eyebrow at that 5.3% dip in consolidated net sales. That's 8,003 crores, a hefty chunk of change to be down. Standalone sales weren't much prettier either, falling 6.5% to 6,841 crores. So is this a sign of trouble in paint paradise?
Well, let's put those figures into perspective. It's tempting to see this as just an Asian paints problem. But the reality is the entire paint industry seems to be going through a bit of a slowdown. These numbers really underscore that broader trend. The question is how much of this is an industry-wide issue and how much is specific to Asian paints and the choices they've made.
Ooh, good point. Almost makes me think of that old saying about a rising tide lifting all boats. Or in this case, maybe a falling tide. But hold on, before we get too gloomy. They also announced a pretty hefty interim dividend, 4.25 per share, which is a whopping 425%. What's the message they're sending to investors with a move like that?
You can think of it as a confidence booster shot. This dividend isn't just generous, it's significantly higher than what they've paid out before. And that suggests they're feeling pretty good about their cash flow situation,
Mm.
even with these dips in sales. For investors, it's a signal that they believe they can weather this storm and still deliver those returns.
Okay, so maybe not panic stations just yet, but let's zoom in on where things get really interesting. Their domestic decorative business. This is their bread and butter, right? So color me shocked when I saw volumes down 0.5% and revenue down even more by 6.7%. That's not just a drizzle, it's a full-on monsoon hitting their core market. What on earth is driving that?
Well, there are actually multiple factors at play here. The report itself points to weak consumer sentiment, which is understandable given the economic slowdown we've been talking about. People tighten their belts and home improvement projects are often the first to go. And then quite literally you have the weather. India had a rough time with those persistent rains and even flooding in some areas. Not exactly ideal conditions for painting.
How are you telling me? I can't imagine trying to get a fresh coat on anything when it's pouring outside. Talk about a recipe for drips and disaster.
Exactly. But it's not just those external factors at play here. Asian Paints also made some price cuts last year, which of course impacts their revenue comparisons this year. You add to that a shift in their product mix, meaning they might be selling more of their lower-priced items. Plus, they've increased rebates to attract customers. And you've got a recipe for lower revenue numbers.
So not a great situation.
There could be a silver lining. They did bump up prices in Q2, so we'll have to see how that plays out in the second half of the year. Could be their attempt to regain some of that lost ground.
All right, fingers crossed. So their core business took a bit of a hit. But what about their industrial side? Did that offer any shelter from the storm?
Actually, yes. The industrial business is showing some positive signs. They're seeing some decent growth, driven by three key areas: general industrial, protective coatings,
Mm-hmm.
and refinish.
Okay, so a bit of sunshine peeking through the clouds then. But for those of us who don't speak fluent paint industry, can you break down those growth areas for us? What makes them significant for Asian paints, and why should we as listeners care about them?
Sure. So general industrial is their broadest category. Think coatings for machinery and equipment. Basically anything metal that needs protecting and sprucing up. Growth here could actually signal that industrial activity in India is picking up, which is good news for the overall economy. Then you have protective coatings. These are used in big projects like infrastructure, oil and gas, even ships. If this segment is growing, it might suggest investment in these sectors is happening, which can have ripple effects throughout the economy.
That makes sense.
And lastly, refinish, as the name suggests, is all about giving things a second life with a fresh coat of paint. Cars, furniture, you name it. This segment's growth could be tied to consumer spending on refurbishment. Maybe people are fixing up old stuff instead of buying new. It's an interesting trend to watch.
So a bit of a mixed bag so far. Challenges in their core business, but some promising signs in the industrial sector. Let's move on to their home decor venture. From what I saw in the report, that seems to be a bit of a puzzle as well.
Yeah, it is a curious situation. On the surface, things look rosy. They're seeing continued growth in home decor, largely thanks to their beautiful home stores network. It's a smart strategy going beyond just paint and offering a complete home makeover package.
Okay, but I sense a but coming.
You're right. Here's the unexpected part. Despite this growth, they actually took an impairment loss on their investments in White Teak and Weatherseal.
Oh, wow.
These are companies they acquired, but it seems their business plans have been revised, suggesting they might not be performing as well as initially hoped.
Wait, so even with Greif, they're taking a loss. That's unexpected, to say the least. What does this tell us about the future of their home decor ambitions?
It's a clear sign that even a market leader like Asian Paints has to stay nimble and adjust their course. The home decor market is really competitive, and sometimes you need to cut your losses and refocus. This impairment charge suggests they might be shifting gears, maybe doubling down on their core strengths in that beautiful homes network, rather than chasing every opportunity in the home decor space.
Right, play to your strengths, especially when the market is throwing curveballs. Makes sense. But their story doesn't end at India's borders, right? What about their international business? The report makes it sound like they're holding their own on the global stage, despite some headwinds.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. At first glance, you see a marginal decline in international revenue.
Right.
But hold on. When you factor out currency fluctuations, meaning looking at it on a constant currency basis, their international portfolio actually grew by 8.7%.
Whoa, okay, that's a pretty significant difference. So they're not just weathering the storm, they're actually making headway internationally,
Yeah,
even with all the global economic uncertainty. That's impressive.
exactly. But it's not all smooth sailing. They're facing some rough waters in specific markets like Ethiopia and Bangladesh. The report attributes this to challenging macroeconomic conditions. And we know the Ethiopian market in particular was hit hard by currency devaluation, impacting their subsidiary there.
All right, so we've seen the sales picture, the ups and downs across different segments. Now let's talk brass tacks, profitability and margins. The report shows declines in both standalone and consolidated PBDIT margins, which doesn't sound great. What's the story there?
Well, this decline actually ties back to several points we've already talked about. Remember those price reductions they made last year? Well, those are impacting their margins now. Add to that the rising cost of raw materials and increased expenses related to things like sales and marketing. And you've got what we call a classic margin squeeze.
Ah, the domino effect. One decision can really ripple through the whole picture. But earlier you mentioned they're anticipating a margin recovery in the coming quarters. What makes them so optimistic?
Well, their projections are suggesting that raw material prices are starting to soften, which would definitely help. Plus, don't forget those price increases they put in place in Q2. They seem confident that these two factors combined will help them bounce back and restore those margins.
Fingers crossed on that one. Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's take a quick peek at their financial health, specifically their balance sheet. Any red flags or encouraging signs there?
Actually, there's a pretty interesting takeaway from the balance sheet. We see a notable increase in property, plant, and equipment, as well as right-of-use assets and capital work in progress. What does this tell us? They're investing. They're putting money into expanding their production capacity and potentially even venturing into new product lines or technologies. Even in the face of these challenges, they're making moves. That suggests they're gearing up for future growth.
It's like they're playing a long game here. Yes, they're adapting to the current market conditions, but they're also building for the future. That's a smart move.
Absolutely. It speaks to their long-term vision and commitment to staying ahead of the curve. But there's a lot more to unpack here.
You're right about that. We've only just scratched the surface. We'll continue dissecting Asian Paint's performance and what it all means in part 2, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Asian Paint's Q2FY25 financials. We've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still plenty to explore, especially when you consider the company's long history and what these latest moves might signal for their future.
Yeah, that's exactly what's got me hooked. We've seen the challenges, the bright spots, the unexpected twists. But what does it all mean for Asian Paints and their investors? What should we be watching for in the coming months and years?
Well, it's all about connecting the dots, right? We see a company facing all these external pressures, the industry slowdown, cautious consumers, those crazy raw material prices we've all been feeling. But they're also making internal adjustments, price hikes, tweaking their product mix, even swallowing that loss on certain investments. The big question is, will it be enough? Will it be enough to maintain their leadership position?
It's like they're walking a tightrope, balancing those external forces with their internal responses. And the stakes are high. Nobody wants to see a market leader stumble.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so fascinating. Even without a crystal ball, we can get some clues about their future strategy just from the information they have shared. It's a bit like detective work, piecing together the puzzle.
Okay, now you've really got me intrigued. Give me an example. How can we read between the lines here?
Okay, well, take their home decor business, for example. That impairment loss on White Teak and Weather Seal. It's not just a financial hit. It's a sign they're recalibrating their approach. They're not abandoning home decor altogether. The growth of those beautiful home stores shows they're still committed. But they might be prioritizing organic growth, you know, building on their existing strengths,
Hmm.
rather than just relying on acquisitions to conquer every corner of that market.
Makes sense. Why spread yourself thin when you've got a solid foundation? It's like focusing on building a beautiful house instead of trying to buy up every piece of land on the block.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of building, those investments we saw on their balance sheet, the ones for property, plant, and equipment, that's another clue, right? It signals a commitment to expanding their production capacity, maybe even venturing into new product lines or technologies.
So even while they're streamlining in some areas, they're not shying away from growth. It's strategic, targeted, like a laser beam instead of a shotgun approach.
Exactly. They're picking their battles. And this brings us to another key point for investors to think about. Asian Paint's track record. They've consistently shown an ability to adapt to changing market conditions and innovate their way to success. This isn't their first rodeo, so to speak.
Right. They've been around for decades, weathered plenty of storms. That kind of experience counts for something. But as a wise investor once told me, past performance doesn't guarantee future returns.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important for investors to stay informed. Watch the company's actions closely and understand how those decisions align with their own investment goals.
Knowledge is power, as they say, especially when it comes to your own money.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive, to empower you with the insights you need to make those informed decisions. Not just repeating what the report says, but really digging into what it all means.
Speaking of informed decisions, let's circle back to that dividend announcement for a second. We touched on it earlier, but I'd love to get your take on the strategy behind it.
Yeah, it's a savvy move, no doubt. As we discussed, announcing a dividend, especially one as substantial as this 425%, sends a strong message to investors, especially during these uncertain times.
It's like they're saying, hey, we know things are a bit bumpy right now, but we're still financially solid. We believe in our future.
Exactly. It can really boost investor confidence, attract new investors who are looking for companies with a history of sharing the profits.
Right, but there's a real financial impact too, right? It's not just about sending signals.
Of course, paying out a dividend means less cash on hand for the company, less to reinvest in growth, or use for other purposes. It's a decision that has to be weighed carefully.
So that's where the company's track record and future outlook become even more important. Investors want to see that they can maintain this dividend policy while also pursuing those growth opportunities. Can they have their cake and eat it too?
You've hit the nail on the head. It's a delicate balance, one that requires careful planning and execution.
All right, so we've got a company making these strategic adjustments, investing in future growth, rewarding its shareholders. What else should investors be watching for as we look ahead? What are the key factors that could make or break their success?
Well, one area to keep an eye on is their international expansion strategy. They're facing challenges in some markets, but seeing growth in others. It'll be interesting to see how they tailor their approach to different regions. Do they double down on specific markets while pulling back from others? It's a global chess game, figuring out where to make your next move.
And what about the bigger economic picture? That always seems to play a role, especially for companies tied to consumer spending.
Absolutely. The global economic outlook is still pretty uncertain, with inflation and the possibility of recessions looming in various regions. These are definitely factors investors can't ignore when they're assessing Asian Paint's prospects.
So it's not just about looking at the company itself, but understanding how they fit within that larger economic puzzle.
That's a crucial point. It's like trying to predict the weather. You need to look at the whole system, not just one cloud in the sky.
This has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. Asian Paint's current situation, their potential, the risks, it's all coming into focus. But before we move on to part 3, I have one more question that's been nagging at me. What about the competition? How do they stack up against their rivals in the paint and home decor industries? That's got to be a factor in their success, right?
That's an excellent question, and one we'll definitely tackle head-on in part 3. We'll explore that competitive landscape, analyze how Asian Paints measures up against its key rivals, and discuss what that means for their long-term growth prospects. Get ready for round 2 of this paint battle.
All right, we're back for the final stretch of our deep dive into Asian Paints. And as promised, we're stepping into the arena to see how they size up against the competition. Because, let's be real, the paint and home decor markets are no walk in the park. It's a battle royale out there.
You're not wrong. It's a crowded space with some serious contenders all vying for that market share. So yeah, let's paint a picture of who Asian Paints is up against and what strategies they're using to try and stand out in this colorful crowd.
Okay, lay it on me. Who are the major players Asian Paints has to watch out for? And what are the battlegrounds in this paint war? Is it all about price, or are there other secret weapons in their arsenals?
Well, in the Indian paint market,
Yeah.
Asian Paints is constantly sparring with the likes of Burger Paints,
Yeah.
Kansai Nerolac,
Yeah.
and Axonabel. Each of these companies brings its own strengths and strategies to the table. It makes for a really dynamic and fiercely competitive landscape.
So it's a real clash of the titans. But what are they fighting over? What are the key factors that determine who wins? The hearts and wallets of Indian consumers.
Well, price is definitely a factor, especially in a price-sensitive market like India. But it's not just a simple game of undercutting each other. Asian Paints has always had a really strong hand with their brand recognition. They've built up a reputation for quality and reliability over the years, and that really resonates with consumers. Plus, their distribution network is vast. They've got their paints on shelves everywhere, even in those remote areas. That kind of reach is hard to beat.
Their marketing campaigns are pretty iconic too, right? They've definitely mastered the art of storytelling and creating those memorable ads that really stick with you. It's like they're not just selling paint, they're selling a feeling and aspiration.
Exactly. They've done a fantastic job of building a strong brand image, and that allows them to charge a premium price without scaring away customers. People are willing to pay a bit more for a brand they trust, a brand they associate with quality. And that widespread distribution network we talked about ensures that their products are readily available, which is a huge advantage in a country as big and diverse as India.
So they're playing the long game, building that brand loyalty, making sure their products are accessible. But what about innovation? Are they sticking to the classic formulas? Or are they pushing boundaries and bringing new and exciting products to the market?
Oh, they're definitely not resting on their laurels. Asian Paints has been investing heavily in research and development, always looking for ways to improve their formulations. They've introduced paints with better durability, washability, even eco-friendly options, catering to that growing consumer demand for sustainable products. And they're not just focused on functionality, they've also been expanding their range of decorative finishes and textures, giving people more creative freedom to personalize their spaces.
It's smart to stay ahead of the curve when it comes to those consumer trends. People are always looking for something new and exciting, especially when it comes to their homes. It's not just about covering walls anymore. It's about expressing your style and creating a space that reflects your personality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And brings us to the home decor market, where Asian Paints is facing a bit of a different breed of competitors. Here they're going up against established furniture retailers, interior design firms, even online marketplaces. It's a much more fragmented landscape with players coming from all directions.
That sounds like a whole different ballgame. How are they adapting their strategy to compete in this more diverse market? Are they sticking to their paint and brush roots, or are they branching out and trying new things?
They're definitely branching out.
Yeah.
Their beautiful home stores are key to this strategy. They're creating a one-stop shop for all things home decor, from paints and wallpapers to furniture and accessories. It's a brilliant way to capture more of the customer spending and create a more seamless experience.
It's like they're building a whole ecosystem around the home. You can walk into beautiful homes
Right.
and walk out with everything you need to transform your living space, from the walls to the furniture. That's pretty powerful.
Exactly. And they're not just relying on their physical stores either. They're embracing technology to enhance that customer experience.
Yeah.
They've got virtual reality tools now that allow customers to visualize different paint colors and furniture arrangements in their own homes. It takes the guesswork out of decorating, makes the whole process more engaging and interactive.
Wow, that's impressive. It's like having an interior designer at your fingertips. So they're not just competing on products, they're competing on the entire customer journey, making it as easy and enjoyable as possible.
Precisely. They're trying to create a truly differentiated experience that sets them apart from the competition and builds those lasting relationships with their customers. It's about more than just selling a product. It's about building a brand that people trust and want to invite into their homes.
So with all this in mind, what's your take on Asian Paint's future prospects? Can they hold on to their crown in the face of all this?
Well, it's a challenging but exciting time for Asian Paints, that's for sure. They're definitely not sitting back and watching the world go by. They're adapting, they're innovating, they're investing to stay ahead of the curve, their strong brand, that extensive distribution network, and their focus on customer experience. These are all incredibly valuable assets in this battle. But the competitive landscape is constantly shifting, so they'll need to remain agile and responsive to emerging trends and be willing to evolve those strategies as needed.
It sounds like a recipe for continued success, but one that requires constant vigilance and a willingness to embrace change. No room for complacency in this market.
Exactly. The paint and home decor industries are dynamic and constantly evolving. Asian Paints has a history of navigating these changes effectively, and their recent actions suggest they're well positioned to continue doing so. But as with any investment, it's always crucial for individuals to do their own research, stay informed, and ultimately make decisions that align with their personal goals and risk tolerance.
Well said. This deep dive has been incredibly informative. We've covered so much ground, from their financial performance to their competitive landscape and future strategies. It's amazing how much we can learn from just a few documents when we really take the time to analyze them.
It really is. It's a testament to the power of information and the importance of digging beneath the surface. To gain a true understanding of a company and its potential, we often get caught up in the headlines. But it's the details, the nuances that reveal the real story.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. And for our listeners, if you're looking to delve even deeper, be sure to check out Asian Paint's website. They've got a ton of detailed information and investor resources available.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and never be afraid to dive deep.